Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Drama absolutely everywhere at the Mexican Grand Prix. Max Verstappen and Lando Norris again coming together on track for the second weekend in a row. But this time, Lando gets the better thanks to two 10-second penalties levied against Max Verstappen during the Grand Prix that the Red Bull man was far from happy about. But no pace today for the Red Bull car. But what about these stewarding decisions? Last weekend in Austin, back in 2021, no problem at all. All of a sudden, today Max's driving is landing him in serious trouble. What does this mean for the future? So much drama we're going to get into. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Let's dive right in. We have absolutely no time to waste today because there were about 1 million incidents and I have approximately 1 million tabs that we're going to get into. This is the start of the Grand Prix. Again, Max Verstappen, a masterclass off the line in Mexico. He's done it again, but already... Yes, there's the crash in the background for Tsunoda, Albon and Gasly. Tsunoda kind of just gets crammed out of space really because Gasly finds himself here. Albon had no room. Racing incident, turn 1 is what it is. But turn 1 was controversial again as far as I'm concerned. So Max finds himself in this position, gets a much better start off the line than Sainz did, is ahead, gets his nose in front as they run down into turn 1. But of course, Sainz was starting on pole. So who is actually ahead here? This was a debate we had the other day when McLaren were arguing in Austin that actually Lando had become the defending car after overtaking Max because he'd pulled a car length ahead. Now, in this particular screenshot here, we can see that Verstappen is ahead of Sainz by, a front wings distance or whatever, but Verstappen does the Verstappen classic and he just drives Sainz off of the road. They find themselves in roughly this position when Sainz has to take to the runoff area and go across the grass and eventually give the position back because, Max was in front. But again, this is somewhat controversial because McLaren might argue, as they did after Austin, that, hey, actually, Max wasn't in front because he was the attacking car. Sainz was the defending car. So, you could argue here that Max has effectively forced his rival off the road while not being entitled to that position. But, well, Max knows that ahead at the apex, which he was, so, he forces Sainz off the track here. And, I mean, this was 2021 Max Verstappen here today. Like, there's no doubt about it, right? And I'm not exactly sure what got into Max because this was Hungary all over again, as far as I'm concerned. Might be his worst, performance of the season in some respects. And the car was just slow. But, yeah, Max, great start. Obviously bullies his way past Sainz in many respects. Lando maybe could have done a better job into turn 1, but he was careful into turn 1. Tsunoda and Albon have the crash. They're both out of the Grand Prix. And yeah, so we have this moment here where Hamilton as well makes the move on Russell. Tsunoda, unfortunately for him, was out, and both RBs with not exactly an ideal position today. Sergio Perez, by the way, as you guys can tell on the left-hand side here, up 5 places. Wow, what a start, right? But, well, it turned out, we'll see the reason for that in a second. So the safety car deployed for the second weekend in a row, and again for the 4th year in a row, Max leads out of turn 1, but or at least after the first lap. The problem is, however, that was not going to stay for too much longer, and this was Sergio Perez. This, on the left-hand side, is the yellow line, the line where your front wheels must touch. Perez was at least, 2 car or 2 wheel lengths or whatever over the yellow line, and of course over the white line as well. So, evidence box infringement for the start of the Grand Prix, and he was given very swiftly afterwards a 5-second penalty. Now, I will say there was some talk about this within the commentary box that if you're given a 5-second pen for having your car, significantly over the line, is that worth it, right? Let's say you're Verstappen in an RB19, and okay, if you're Verstappen in an RB19, you're winning the race anyway, but let's say you're second on the grid. What if you were to just accidentally go over the grid box by a couple of meters, and it's like, oh well, my bad, I guess it's a 5-second pen, but then you obviously use that to take the lead of the race, which is usually far more valuable than a 5-second penalty. So I think that's got to be thought about. But at this point, Sainz, despite falling out of DRS immediately after the safety car went through, he then was back within 8 tenths or so, and honestly, the Ferrari was a rocket ship in a straight line, and Max was complaining about his battery settings. Sainz sends it down the inside of Max, and all of a sudden, because they battled for a little bit, Lando was right back in play, and we had this situation on lap 9. So Sainz is back in the lead. At this point, we had no idea what the race pace was going to look like. Was Max going to be competitive? Was Lando in the fastest car? Arguably, the McLaren was the fastest car today. You can very much make the argument. But yeah, Sainz was at this point kind of away and gone. And this is what happened after all the drama unfolded, right? So, you know, Leclerc then gets ahead of Verstappen, and that happened because of this particular incident, right? So Verstappen was overtaken. Max was on the radio saying, my engine modes, my battery isn't working properly. And then we had this into turn 4. So this is exactly the same as what happened back in Austin. Max is defending the inside line. You can't even see Sainz, by the way. He's out of the picture on the left-hand side of the screen. Max has got the inside line. Lando tries to go around the outside. And I'm sure Lando knew what was coming. And I'm sure us watching knew what was coming. Max was always going to just shuffle Lando off the track. Because that's exactly what he did in Austin. And, you know, Max was ahead at the apex because he broke deep. And he just forced Lando wide, no room to come through. But in Austin, not only was it the same in Austin, but it was actually worse, right? Because in Austin, this happens, but Max went off the track and forced Lando wide as well. In this case, Max kept it within the white lines. So Max would argue, and the team would argue, and maybe they still will after the race, although it's not going to affect the overall positions, that this is somewhat inconsistent. Because in Austin, Max did this, but worse, and wasn't punished, and actually Lando was for maintaining the position, whereas here, Max was punished. Genuinely, when Max did this, I thought, you know what, it's not exactly clean racing as far as I'm concerned, and as many are concerned, but I thought this would be fine, because last weekend, the stewards basically said it was fine. They were like, hey, Max, you know, if you're the defending car, which he was, and you hold the inside line, which he was, and you're ahead of the apex, which he was by braking late, doesn't matter what happens. Lando has no right to the corner. That's what the stewards said last weekend. They said that in this instance, Lando has no right to the corner. Who cares? So no penalty would be the implication. And that's what I thought was going to happen. But actually, no, he did get a penalty for this. So I'm very confused. Do I think the penalty for this was potentially deserved? I think it's kind of marginal, actually. But sure, I could justify it. But, like, for the last few years, he's not been getting penalised for this. So what's changed now? It genuinely feels to me the stewards have changed their approach because of all the drama about it over the last few days, which should absolutely not be how it is. Now, I'm not trying to defend Max here, because he raced terribly today and didn't deserve anything less than he got today. This was the most egregious incident by far. Max was clearly annoyed at that, for whatever reason, because Lando was ahead after this, right? And Max then decided that he was going to send it down the inside into the S's section, which is absolutely a spot where no one has ever made a successful overtake in the history of Formula 1. Like, it's just not possible really to overtake there, certainly on the same tyre age and all this type of stuff. So Max just dives down the inside, forces both of them off the track here, right? So, like, Max cannot make this corner. He forces Lando off, retakes the position, and like, this is just such an outrageous move. I can believe Max went for it, but, like, man, there ain't many drivers like Max about, and this is the frustrating thing. Max is so good. He's so talented. The fact that he was able to do a 16.3 in quali yesterday, get it deleted, bang in a 16.1 for second on the grid. Like, you know, the guy is such a good driver. I don't know why he has to do stuff like this. I just don't understand it. Because he knows, to be fair, Max in this instance, he's not fighting Leclerc, he's not fighting Sainz, he's just fighting Lando. So Max was probably quite happy to say, you know what, I'm going to force you off track, Lando. I'm going to go off track myself. Completely egregious driving, to be honest, and allows Leclerc through, which in many respects screws Norris's race, right? Because sure, after the penalties, Lando scored a pretty big points differential today on Max, but he didn't get as many points as he could have done if he'd have won the Grand Prix. Lando was on the radio saying this guy's dangerous, the same as last time, I can't believe it, and I mean, this was completely egregious as far as I'm concerned. Verstappen then kept the position. This is also what confuses me about Red Bull. Red Bull were watching that and were like, are you serious, Max? Like, I mean, surely there must have been, right? I mean, come on, what else is the reaction? They should have told Max, all right, Max, give the position back, and if they'd have done so, they probably don't get one of those 10-second penalties. But instead, GP's on the radio being like, oh, Norris is whining and all this. I'm like, I don't know, it seems to me that either Verstappen just completely owns that team, or Red Bull enable this driving by not telling Max when he's over the line, because he was clearly over the line. So, you know, they didn't tell him to give the place back, and they got slapped with a load of penalties. Now, when this penalty came through, I thought it was a penalty for this incident, right? It said Max plus 10, and I thought it was for this, because this was absolutely fair. I mean, you can argue this even could have been more than a 10 seconds, but, you know, fair enough. 10-second penalty for, like, completely ridiculously forcing Norris off the track and screwing both of their races because Leclerc gets through. But when GP was on the radio, he was telling him, forcing Lando off the track, implying turn 4. So then it was like, well, hang on a second, was that for the turn 4 incident? And as I say, the turn 4 incident was no different in many respects to Austin, where there was no further action, and was also no difference to Perez versus Lawson a few laps later, where Perez got no further action. So, look, I don't think these penalties were necessarily undeserved. All we're asking for is some consistency from the stewards, and we just can't seem to get it at all. So the turn 4 incident was the big damage here. Feel bad for Fernando Alonso as well. He had some sort of brake leak or something, cooling thing, I don't know, and they had to retire his car from his 400th Grand Prix weekends. There was a bit of drama at the front as well. So Carlos Sainz, of course, in the lead was saying, look, Ferrari, tell Charles to back off. We don't need to fight each other. And, because of course Sainz wants to win, and he's going to say what he can on the radio to give himself the best chance of doing so. And to be fair, Charles just wasn't quite on the pace of Sainz this weekend, and Sainz had a phenomenal weekend from start to finish. To be fair, usually what happens with the Ferrari pairing is that Leclerc outperforms Sainz week on week on week, and then Sainz has a really good weekends. All of a sudden it's like, oh wow, like Sainz so underrated. And he is, to some degree. Sainz is a very solid driver, but I feel like this always happens when Charles has a great run against Sainz, and then Sainz has like a really good weekends, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, Ferrari fired the wrong guy. Like, I don't buy that for a second personally, but I do think Sainz should get a better seat than Williams. But that is not necessarily mutually exclusive. This was the drama though, right? And this drama kept on going for the entire race. Lawson versus Perez. Perez went for a frankly ridiculous move down the inside into turn 4. So unnecessary as well, because he would have got the move done probably the next lap anyway. But he goes for the move. He forces Lawson off the track, just how Max did to Lando. Then he comes back on, maintains the place in the ends, and he gets some damage actually though here riding over the curbs, which destroyed his entire race from then on out. But nonetheless, no further action for this incident. So what's going on, right? Doesn't make all that much sense to me. No further action for this one, but all of a sudden the Verstappen Lando one was a penalty. So I'm just a little bit confused. Perez was then on the radio saying that Lawson was an idiot. What's this guy doing and all this? And the drama did not stop there, let me tell you. Then the second penalty comes through. So Max gets hit with another 10-second penalty for the turn 8 incident, which is for sure deserved. But yeah, the turn 4 thing still to me somewhat confusing. So this is a screenshot, right? And this is what many would say after today. It's like, hey, why was it that Max's driving in this manner was not punished this way in, last weekends for the rest of the season, but certainly in 2021, right? I mean, like this type of stuff, like just that incident when he forces Lando off the track in turn 8, that's not been an incredibly isolated circumstance. Certainly in a year like 2021, there was, lots of that happening. It's sometimes both ways, but the stewards never really cared or did anything about it. The regulations haven't changed. Is it just different stewards in charge weekend to weekends? This is when the drama continues about this Derek Warwick guy. Like, I know that I've mentioned him before just because he has this like Honda dealership, and there's a general theory, unsubstantiated or whatever, that he has a bias in favour of Red Bull. But, again, Derek Warwick was in the stewards room last weekend in Austin when obviously Max wasn't punished for a couple of instances against Lando. This weekend, Warwick is not in the stewards room, and now they're punishing him heavily. So it's like, I'm not trying to say there's something in that, but this is why Hamilton and Russell are saying we need permanent stewards. So it's at least the same guys every week. Because if it's literally different stewards in the FIA room, which it is week on week, how can you expect consistent decisions? The issue is, it was the same stewards that looked at Verstappen versus Norris as looked at Perez Lawson, but yet decided that a different outcome was mandated. So, it's just remarkable. And as I say, like, the rules haven't necessarily changed since Brazil 21, but apparently this was fine. But obviously today it wasn't fine. So, like, I don't get it. Nobody gets it. Max, of course, comes on the radio and says, like, how about turn 4? That's fine then. That's silly, man, because, like, Lando got ahead, and technically by the rules or whatever, like we saw in Austin, maybe that was unfair. But I don't really think Max has any grounds to complain after today. But still, I kind of get some of the criticisms. And Max comes into the pits anyway. Hamilton was complaining about graining and stuff, and has a 24-second pit stop. 20 seconds, and then obviously it generally takes a bit longer because they're paused pause there for a while to get back in the groove of things. And Lando at this point was 41 seconds ahead of Max Verstappen. Lando is also 6 or so seconds behind Charles Leclerc at this moment, and Verstappen was going to have to make some progress. Perez had damage, but he had an absolute disaster of a race today. And then there was some quite good battling here when Piastri was trying to make progress in the field. I will say again on Piastri today, the McLaren was arguably the fastest car. Lando had the most pace at the end of the Grand Prix, and if it wasn't for the early incidents with Verstappen and falling, losing a lot of lap time, he could well have won the Grand Prix. Piastri did not beat a 20-second penalised Verstappen today, which is a pretty big deal, not just in the McLaren context for their constructors, but also for Lando, right? It just feels like on weekends where Lando needs Piastri's help, he's just not there to give it, is he? And again, I think a weekend where last year Piastri was pretty good in the European stint, after that not quite so much. I think we're seeing it again this year where Piastri's pace and consistency just isn't where it needs to be, especially if he's going to try and win the Drivers' Championship next year, which seems a plausible aim. So, bit of drama here. Obviously, Lawson, Piastri, Hamilton, all in a bit of a battle. Hamilton tried to get the move done. He went onto the grass here, like he did, I think, when he passed Charles Leclerc last year. This time he couldn't get the move done here, but he got it done a few corners later. Max, by the way, was coming up on Colapinto at this moment. Hamilton had the fastest lap. Lawson was further up the road as well. And on lap 37, roughly, just over half distance, it was looking as follows. The Hasses, though, we've got to talk about the Haas boys because, wow, they were making some serious strides over the last few rounds, and that continued today. I don't really know how Russell got this front wing damage, but he did. And the concerning thing is for Mercedes, not only were they so far off the pace today, but Russell's package was Silverstone spec. They won Silverstone, so good spec. But they had to revert the car back to an older spec version because the car just, George had crashed it and they'd run out of new parts. But George's car was just faster than Hamilton's until he got the damage. And that's the concern. And Hamilton, after the Grand Prix, was like, maybe we made some progress, guys, but this floor is dodgy. I don't like it. And that's a concern, given it was Mercedes' brand new floor upgrades that they thought was going to take him a big step in the right direction. So at this point in the Grand Prix, McLaren were still leading the constructors on the live results, but Ferrari were overtaking Red Bull. And I talked about it yesterday. A Ferrari 1-2 today was not implausible at all. And it looked like for a relatively long time that it was actually exactly what was going to happen. Piastri then eventually pits. I thought they were going to use him to try and hold up Max for a few laps, but I guess they thought that, there was no hope of him surviving on the mediums for too much longer. But just have a look at some of the deltas here, right? So Max at this point is 7.5 seconds behind Hamilton. And it felt like, well, the Mercedes is pretty slow. Verstappen's going to catch that up and maybe even get to 4th. In the ends, Verstappen was kind of lucky to hold on to 6th. Like, the Red Bull in that final stint was just not fast at all. And again, it adds a bit of fuel to the fire to this whole T-tray adjustment thing, doesn't it, right? Just because when that was a rumour during the Austin Grand Prix weekends, the argument was that if they were able to adjust the ride height, it would mean that the compromise between quali and the race wouldn't be necessary, i.e. they would start to appear significantly stronger in one than the other. And we've kind of seen that, right? Like in Austin, certainly in the race, Verstappen's quali pace, mesmerising. Race pace, nowhere near the fastest. And again, this weekend, we saw the same thing. Verstappen was, right there in quali trim. And in the race, he was nowhere today, nowhere. And neither was Sergio Perez, but, maybe for other reasons, right? This was Perez getting overtaken by Lance Stroll. So there was that. And Lawson then got the move done shortly after as well. Sainz was a bit concerned up front because his engine was misfiring. And I realize this video is kind of long, but wow, we had a lot to discuss here today. So Charles Leclerc was doing a lot of lift and coast. Ferrari, of course, managing temperatures in the car. And I think there was never going to be a battle out front. They never wanted to let the Ferrari boys tangle. I think they were quite happy with Sainz getting the win for his farewell tour and Leclerc bringing home as many points as possible. But then we had this moment of Lawson getting through on Perez. And it actually turned out that this, have a look at this, guys. So Lawson's coming past Sergio Perez here. And as he makes the move down the main straight at Perez's home Grand Prix, let's not forget, Lawson throws the middle finger up. There it is at the bottom of the screen. He throws the middle finger up as he's passing Perez. I imagine it's a bit of a payback for earlier in the race when, Perez pushed Lawson off the track. But, obviously he got damaged because of the instant, and then it allowed Lawson to pass him later on. But this is a very interesting one, isn't it? Because, I don't know if Lawson needs some sort of serious security detail to get him out of there tonight. He may very well do after this Grand Prix. What are Red Bull going to think about this? Are they going to think, brilliant, feisty young driver with potential? Or are they going to think, wow, so disrespectful, can't believe we employed this guy? Probably not the latter, knowing Red Bull Racing historically at the very least. Piastri was making some progress as well through the field, but yeah, the Haas boys again continued to cook, and Magnussen, as we saw in the screenshot earlier, Verstappen was, not that far behind Hamilton. Then Russell and Hamilton were battling for lap after lap after lap. Magnussen was closing in on Max. Magnussen closed about 4 seconds in the final stint on Max, which is wow, that's seriously impressive, right? There was some fear that it was going to rain. That never really materialized, and also I never trust George Russell when it comes to whether it's going to rain or not. So anyway, the race was kind of rounding down, really. Hamilton was about to fight Russell for 4th place, and Norris was banging in fastest lap after fastest lap. It seems, again, the McLaren on the harder tyres at the end of the Grand Prix on lower fuel is just very, very strong, and Lando showed it again today. He was closing in on Leclerc, and maybe the win was even on, if not for the early drama, obviously. So and then Sainz was on the radio telling Leclerc to back off, basically, and was like, look, I'm pushing too hard. Tell Charles to chill out as well. And, surely they were telling him, you realise that Lando ain't far behind. We actually have to push to try and hold position here. And that's what eventually happened. Lando really benefited from the backmarker traffic. Leclerc got held up in way more difficult positions than Norris did. So it ended up, they closed in quite dramatically, and Leclerc was struggling with the rear, eventually has a massive snap of oversteer, could very easily have been Leclerc in the wall here, which would have been interesting news for Norris, I guess, because if he'd have been in the wall, Leclerc, safety car would have happened, and Lando would have, maybe been able to fight for the win, but also that would have brought Verstappen up a place. So that was a possibility. Anyway, Norris gets the move done. Ferrari, therefore, comfortably ahead of Red Bull Racing in the Constructors and closing in rather rapidly indeed on McLaren as it stands. Hamilton eventually gets the move done on George Russell after battling lap after lap. And then there was this incident. Colapinto goes past Lawson and then kind of gets the move done just about. Then they collide. Maybe a racing incident. Maybe Colapinto slightly over the line. Don't know what you guys think on that one, but of course Lawson wasn't happy about it. Pulls into the pits for a new front wing and therefore scored no points. And Perez, to kind of get his own back in some regards, comes on the radio and says, what's the idiot doing? And then says, I guess it's the same idiot that crashed again. And he says he watched it on the highlights reel. So Perez is driving around in the back of the field with no pace at all, just watching the TV screens. And, at this rate, he's going to be watching the TV from his sofa next season if he keeps on performing like this. Perez then boxes for the fastest lap attempt. And guess what? He can't get it. To be fair, the car was damaged. So it was always Leclerc's to get. Leclerc pits, gets the extra point, takes it away from Lando, which obviously proved to be a rather big deal. But yeah, a masterclass from Carlos Sainz this whole weekend. And man, Ferrari are cooking, right? Lando Norris in seconds. That's big for him. And after the 20-second penalty for Max, he finishes in P6, over 10 seconds behind Russell in the ends. And that, of course, is a 10-point loss to Lando Norris in the championship. Magnussen in 7th, Hülkenberg in 9th, Piastri recovers to 8th, maybe it could have been better. Gasly gets the point for Alpine in 10th, very commendable. And Verstappen, of course, was not a happy man. He says the pace was absolutely shocking today, as was some of his driving, to be honest. But look, if this pace advantage and situation maintains itself in the upcoming rounds, this championship is not over. Yes, if you look at the numbers over the entirety of the championship, Lando needs to outscore Max by 12 points a weekend. I think it's a 47-point gap now. Lando needs to outscore Max by 12 points per race weekends. And he's only done that in Australia when Max DNF'd this entire season. So doing it 4 weekends in a row is obviously a big challenge, but it's absolutely not impossible. The issue for Lando really is that Ferrari are just getting in the way by being absolutely rapid. So yeah, it's a remarkable situation. Lando said after the race in that interview that we just just mentions, not clean driving from Max. I avoided it. It was a good race. And yeah, can you believe it? Last year we had 10 straight Verstappen wins. We now have 10 straight non-Verstappen wins. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments as ever. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.